Tonebenders, the Sound Designers Podcast. Here are your hosts, Timothy and René.
Welcome to Tonebenders. My name is René Coronado, and with me today, as always, it's Tim Muirhead. Hey, Tim.
Hey, René, how you doing?
I'm doing good.
Excellent.
And joining us also, it's Tim Farrell.
Hello.
How are you, sir?
How are you guys? I am well. How are you guys?
Just to spell it out here, Tim has worked on The Walking Dead for a good long while now. He's also worked on Star Trek Discovery, Longmire, Terminator, The Sarah Connor Chronicles, and films like Crash and Hercules and a whole bunch more. You can find us on Twitter. I am at René_Coronado, and Tim is at Azimuth Audio.
Excellent. Welcome, Tim.
So with that out of the way, how are you?
Which Tim? There's two Tims.
Oh, there's two Tims. We gotta figure that out.
Call me Pasquale for the rest of it, and he can be Tim, okay?
Pasquale, okay. Yeah. I can be LA Tim, I guess.
Tim, yeah, LA Tim. How you doing?
Toronto Tim.
Yeah, I get the
Yeah,
TT.
we're doing 3 time zones today for sure, so that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's always fun.
So, Tim, LA Tim, tell us how you got started in the business. That's how we kind of like to hear how everyone gets into the business.
Well, I went to USC Film School, and I had a teacher there, Don Hall, who really just kind of sparked my interest in sound. And it was actually kind of funny when I went to film school. I said, as long as I don't end up as like a sound editor in television, that's pretty much the only thing I don't want to do, which of course is now what I'm doing. But you know, things have changed so much since then that I'm super happy to be here, you know, doing what I do. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Where are you working out of mostly now?
So I've been at Warner Brothers for 10 years, and I started off at Sound Deluxe, and then went over to Tadeo and got involved in their TV department, and then from there, one of my the supervisor I was working for he went over to Warner Brothers, and I went with him, and we've been there ever since.
That's great. Yeah, Warner Brothers is a really cool stage. It's a cool facility. And, we actually, at Dallas Audio Post, we do a fair amount of ADR that goes over to your stage. And so it blows right by you, but we have a good relationship with you guys. So it's always
awesome. Yeah,
it's fun to meet people that we all kind of pass in the hallway in the dark on the internet.
Yeah, whenever I'm doing ADR, maybe I've gotten some of your stuff. Mostly I handle the effects though these days.
Mm-hmm. So what's that like? What's your day-to-day like as you're doing the Walking Dead there?
Well, so to be clear, I left Walking Dead at the end of season 7. So at this point, I've moved on completely to Star Trek Discovery because there's just not enough hours in the day to do 2 shows anymore. As the sound effects editor, it kind of changed a lot over the different seasons. At one point, towards the last few years, I was actually embedded in the picture department. So I would drive into the picture department and find out kind of as a way to basically try to get ahead and try to get scenes early and start working on them so that when they finally did picture lock, we would have more of our sounds in place, more of the finished product. They actually build up their OMFs really big in their Avid tracks. So there's a lot of sound and Foley and just small subtle stuff that they really build out their tracks with early on. So the sooner I can get in there with them, the better, was kind of my typical Walking Dead day. It was kind of different, but for the most part, it was just get in and find out where people are and what they need help with.
That's a pretty common workflow now, isn't it? Like lots of sound editorial happening on the picture editing side and happening on the Avid side before it hits Pro Tools now.
Well, I feel like definitely on the picture editorial side, there's more and more demand to have more of a finished track. So I think in post-production, we're actually still kind of catching up with that concept. I think there's a lot of hard work going in from picture assistants that, sound editors have to recreate. I mean, in a way, I'm actually hoping that down the line we can kind of get the workflow adjusted so more sound editors are actually starting with the picture department sooner rather than, after picture lock, once all these thoughts have been gone into it. I would really love to see more creative, let's get the guy that we're going to have to do this involved when we're creating this stuff as opposed to as an afterthought.
For sure.
So you came into The Walking Dead in the 2nd or 3rd season, is that correct?
I started on season 2.
Season 2. And then you were on it till the end of season 7, so you were on for 5 seasons.
Yes, I did 5 seasons of it.
That is a long haul for one project. That's pretty impressive.
It was, what is that, 92 episodes, 93 episodes or something?
Yeah,
that's a lot.
Yeah, I got up to episode 99. I couldn't make the big 100.
Well, one of the series that I'm working on is a children's animated series, and we just hit episode 100.
Oh, okay.
So yesterday we finished the mix on episode 101. So I feel you. I know what you mean. It's been 5 years of my life into this one animated series. So I would have much rather it had been 5 years of my life in Walking Dead, to be honest with you. But
well, I'm sure the struggles are the same.
Yeah, I'm sure.
That show actually literally gave me nightmares, though. Like, I got into season 3 and I had to stop.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's like the highest compliment I guess I could get.
Yeah, exactly.
I never once got a single like zombie nightmare, or I guess when you're like in the sausage factory and seeing all the bits, it's less terrifying. But it's definitely been a fun run for, you know. I guess because I'm the guy making it sound so gross. That it's not that bad when I get it.
Well, one of the reasons that I reached out to you to get you on the show is I wanted to talk to you about something that you have a unique perspective on. And it's kind of a tricky subject matter because there's lots of people out there looking for work. So when someone complains about trying to maintain focus on a job they've had for a really long time, there are probably people out there that would like to smack you in the face when I complain about a show that I've been working on for a long time. So I want to be upfront when we talk about how to keep a long-term project fresh for the next little bit, that we're not complaining about the work. The work is awesome and we're super happy to have it. But it does with anything. If you're working on something for years at a time, you have to find new ways to keep it fresh and to keep yourself invested in it in new ways. And I wanted to talk to you about that, about how you've gone about finding ways to do that. Absolutely.
I would actually like to touch on the complaining thing, because that was all the hardest part, because I've actually, made the decision to leave, and it was so hard because here I am, I'm on the number one show on, basically on any channel. We have all these viewers, we have so much job security, and I kind of got creatively at my end, and I was like, well, how can I let go of this? I mean, I was surrounded by great people that I loved working with, but it's weird. And I was like, how can I give this up? They took such good care of me. Like, I'm like, this might be the dumbest thing I've ever done in my life. And that's how I felt. And it was actually a big struggle to make that decision.
Well, take us back to season 2. Take us back to when you're starting. How much of the palette is already built? How much continuing new stuff are you bringing? Because at season 2, your aesthetic is already established, right?
No, yes and no. Because what happened at the end of season 1 and the beginning of season 2 is we changed showrunners.
Okay.
So while there was an established aesthetic with Frank Darabont for season 1, we had Glenn Mazzara come in for season 2, and in theory, we wanted to maintain what Frank did, but we also, didn't know what his aesthetics were going to be. So we definitely took some risks. I know Frank very much wanted things to be, I remember at the beginning of season 2, they wanted everything like quiet, everything very, very quiet. And everything very dead and still, in this apocalyptic world. And Glenn actually, we found really enjoyed little things like bugs and birds and more life, just to kind of, as long as it fit the tone and the mood of the scene. So that was actually something that I kind of changed from season 1 to season 2, was I started adding back in more of the life as, after the initial apocalypse, things start to kind of grow again, essentially, was my idea. So the zombies have always been the same. It basically was a group of people, ADR group, and it was the same group of people. And my boss, Jerry Ross, was in charge of them. So he's always done all the zombie recording and editing for the show. So
zombie vocals, you mean, right?
Zombie vocals, yeah. So the vocals, the zombies on our show, for the most part, are actually actors. We also then would sweeten, there's a... Oh man, I don't know if I just say this, but Jerry's going to kill me. We've been pretending it's this dog that is his business partner Skip Leapsay's dog.
I went to New York last year and interviewed him.
Yeah.
And
sweetest guy.
Dave, the dog.
Yeah, Dave the dog. Yeah, Dave.
Dave was there for the interview, and Dave for some reason, did not like that we put a lav on Skip. So Dave is on Skip's lap with his nose half a millimeter from the lav for the entire interview. And
wow.
So Skip he's an engaging talker and saying this thing. And what you hear in the interview is, but he would every once in a while start growling and make these really bizarre sounds. And Skip told us that he's been used in Walking Dead, so he had mentioned that as well. So
with this growl, and we would slow it. It was always whenever they're eating, he would always go in.
Yeah, cool.
But we also have the actors that come in, and there's basically the same. It's been about the same 4 or 5 guys for the whole run of the series to keep kind of consistency with it. So that obviously was something that was established season 1 and they continued on. But as far as the gore, I definitely started changing up the gore, and but the show kind of started visually changing and it became more something else. So season 1's, if you look back, a very different show than especially where it is now. It's just, to me, night and day, but it's been an interesting journey for sure.
So in that space, did you spend some time, continuing to build your palette between seasons or between episodes, or just in the cracks, or how did that work?
So basically that's the way I always work is every season I would start kind of with a fresh palette, but each episode would then, slide down an hour on the timeline, and I would start the next show, and then I could reference things that I'd done before and build upon. And, I really believe that with sound design, you take small pieces and you make bigger pieces, then you take those bigger pieces and you make bigger pieces, and it builds and builds. And as you work and grow in your career, you have these just huge pieces that become colossal pieces, by the time you're working. But you start, everything starts very small, and you just slowly start to build up and create your palette. But you get bored of the same sounds after a while. So you start finding new ways to do the exact same thing that you've done a million times already. So.
And that's an internal thing, right? That's because I'm bored with this sound more than because I need a different sound for this, right?
Well, yeah, and sometimes changing is actually the wrong decision because the sound that you have works really well, and to not use it, it's I'm sure you guys all have your forever explosions that you go to, and you're like, oh, let's try these new ones. Then you realize, well, we're not getting that same transient, we're not getting that same attack, we're not getting that same punch from this new one and then you get on stage and you get the note, this doesn't sound right. And you're like, oh, I know what'll work. The thing I've used a million times. Oh, I know exactly how to solve this problem. I'll just put in the sound I should have done from the get-go when I was bored.
That's what I get for trying something new, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's, and then other times it's just great, but that's always a fun challenge.
So what was the turnaround, the schedule and turnaround for Walking Dead?
From an effects standpoint, we would have 8 shifts for effects per episode, and that did not include obviously the zombie recording and editing. So that was for all the backgrounds and for, all the hard effects, essentially.
8 shifts. So does that mean you split those up amongst multiple people, or?
Well, when we started, it was me and a guy named Phil Berry, who's gone on to do a lot of feature work. And he had 3 days for the backgrounds, and I would have 5 days to do the rest. And then at the end of season 2, he left to go pursue feature stuff, and I just inherited all the shifts and moved forward.
So you do it 8 days, essentially.
8 days, essentially, yeah. And then if we had a big episode or something, we'd request more days or whatever it was. Some of the big season finales that were just nuts, we'd be like, hey. And then you kind of sometimes you're like you barter shifts. Like someday you're like, oh, this one we went a little over, but this one went a little under, and you can kind of make it work. You don't have to do any of that.
Did you typically have score to work against, or were you kind of going blind?
Well, we would get score, on the stage. So yeah, we were pretty much blind. Although it was interesting because when the aesthetics of the show have really greatly changed. If you go back and look at the first couple of seasons, there was maybe 6 minutes of score in the entire episode.
Yeah.
And now, if you look at it, it's about 42, 43 minutes, like most TV shows. Mm-hmm. And that's, changed. We had another showrunner change in season 3 to 4. So he started season 4, and he again had a new set of aesthetics. So and he definitely likes music a lot more than the previous 2. So we show changed again.
So why don't we talk a bit about what we were mentioning earlier about ways that you would maybe did you do it mostly between seasons to try and keep stuff fresh, or were you doing it episode to episode? Or
Well, it's usually season. So for me, the biggest thing I did was, there's multiple ways to skin a cat. So I just basically tried to figure out new ways of doing it, essentially. So like one of the things I did was, I think it was season 5, said, well, I need to learn contact. So I sat down and I started creating contact instruments out of a lot of because at that point I'd had a palette. I'm like, well, rather than edit everything every time, let's start learning how to
perform it.
Exactly. So that was a big thing that helped me a lot between, I was really, when I was starting to feel bored, this was a great challenge because I knew how to solve the problem of, find this piece for this sound. And it was just like, well, let's find a new way to solve that problem. And that really was kind of fun. And then, that was, I think that season I put them all on the same note. So like one note was one sound every single time. And then that got boring pretty fast. And I started learning, like the next season was, okay, let's learn how to like script and randomize so that it's not just the same sound every time. So you don't get bored of it as fast. And, stuff like that. You start learning I'd always get a new set of plugins. I try to find a new, new gore libraries would come out. And I'd be like, oh, cool. I'll just like start playing with these new sounds and try incorporating them and see what happens there. And so that was the big thing for me, was really just finding new ways to solve the problem. Obviously, the change of aesthetics from the different showrunners helped change things a lot too. Like the way that they liked their punches or the way they liked, a lot of things would change and from season to season as things would change sometimes. And even then they like, I know Scott, I don't want to, his aesthetics and opinions on how he likes things would change too. So we actually had a lot of the battle season 4 on was figuring out what he wanted and how, and try to predict that. And that actually became a pretty regular challenge, which was kind of interesting, but we figured it out for the most part.
So when a new showrunner came in, you're screening with them regularly, and then I assume as the more episodes get in the can, you're seeing less of them, or?
Well, he would never show up until we got to stage.
Okay.
He was very, very busy because he was the head writer as well. So he was very busy, and he would be on set a lot. So he basically would fly back just for the mixes.
Okay.
So he would be involved in the picture department, kind of hand it over to us and let us go. And then he'd come back and watch it down and kind of give us his day of notes that we would try to figure out and get through on stage. But that was usually, yeah.
So he was watching on stage with completely fresh ears? Watching with ears, you know what I mean? Like you didn't send him a premix or anything like that?
Every now and again, if there was this very specific scene that he wanted to hear something, I'd send it to him. But honestly, he would watch it on like an iPhone without headphones or anything, or like an iPad, and he really had no idea what he was hearing from what I heard.
Yeah, that's a great way to get your work critiqued, isn't it?
Oh, it's, yeah. So we'd get on stage and it'd be the same thing, and he'd be like, what is all this? Or whatever it is. This sounds different. We're like, well, yeah, a little bit. I think I know why. But, it's a sound editor thing.
So how many changes were happening when he's coming into the stage?
A lot of his notes were music related.
Okay.
A lot of what he was has a similar aesthetic more to what Frank had, where he doesn't like to hear things like Foley, and he likes a more that kind of. He's very sensitive to high pitch stuff, so we had to be really careful. Anything above like, I don't know, like 4K, he would just like, what's that sound? Footsteps, someone setting glasses down would be like too bright for him. So we really had to be careful not to let anything bright through. And so, yeah, like, punches couldn't have bone cracks or anything. And then they all had to be real low and thuddy. And it was so he would go through, and in all honesty, I half the time had no idea what was going to make him bump. So we would just sit there and watch and go, oh, it's this time. Okay, cool. And we'd have to go figure it out or redo it or whatever it was.
So your edit suite is in the same facility as the mix stage?
Well, yeah, I have an office at Warner Brothers, and the mix stage is also at Warner Brothers. And then later seasons, I also set up a separate editing room in the picture department. So when we weren't on stage, I would be at the picture department working, as I'd mentioned, which was just, and a lot of that came from because Scott would go through so much with the picture editors that I was like, well, he's hearing all this stuff on stage and bumping, and it's bumping him. Well, let's get it in earlier. So that's where I took the initiative to be like, listen, just start figuring this out, but I'm going to show up and start, give me some scenes that are early or that need work or that need like sound attention, and let's get the right sounds in early so as he's listening, he can hear stuff and approve it. And that worked maybe 4% of the time.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. So, he gets there, and, I just remember there's one cut, we called it the zombie car wash. And I'd cut this engine for this car that had a lot of character. And I think we went through this sequence. It was on their way to Alexandria. So I think it was season 5. And I revised this thing so many times with all the different cuts. And then we finally get to stage and we're watching, goes, what is this weird sound this car is making? And I'm like, well, the sound that we established and put in, you've heard for the last 2 months. He's like, yeah, it's terrible. We need a whole, and I'm like, well, the whole thing is this big car driving around, and I thought we were good. So now I had to recut the whole car from scratch, and I had just the end of the day. And I'm like, oh boy, we got a print master tonight. Well, it would have been nice to know this, kind of thing. But it's okay, that's just nature of the beast,
Yeah,
that's art.
So like along those lines, talk a little bit about the tools that you were using, in addition to Contact. Kind of what kind of tools were you using to create the sounds, and also a little bit about your work day. What kind of hours were you keeping? When were you walking in? When were you going home?
I usually work about 10 to 8, whatever I'm union, so 9.7 plus our half hour to an hour lunch, depending on whatever. So I try to get in around 10 and leave around 8 because I live far from Burbank. I live in Venice Beach, so it takes me an hour to get in. And if I leave a little later, it takes me only 45 minutes. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of my day and my hours. Sorry, start over. What was the first
Talk about your tools. What kind of tools were you using to do your work?
Just Pro Tools mostly. Pro Tools, and then a variety of plugins. I really like a lot of the McDSP compression. So I use their 60/30 basically on everything in that show. But yeah, it's mostly just it's for me. I'm really a big believer in finding the right sound, and you don't really need to tweak things too much. Especially that show also is very naturalistic. So when you start really processing things and getting the sound of plugins into recordings, it tended to not fit in with the aesthetic of the show. Now it's the opposite. Now I'm on Star Trek, so it's as much of the character of the plugins go into it's part of the signature sound of the sound, right? But I really would try to just keep things as natural as I can, or just it's all about just spending the time to find the right sound in the library. So I'm a pretty standard setup, I guess. I kind of think of it as when I was a kid, I used to play with Legos. I loved Legos, and I had this giant drawer just full of I don't know, hundreds and thousands of Legos or whatever they are. And I would build these, whatever I was building, and I would have to just, I'd open the drawer and I'd reach in, and I guess my drawer in this case is Sound Miner. Mm-hmm. And I would just dig around and try to find the piece that I need. And oh, here it is. Okay, put it on. And then I go back to the drawer. And that's kind of how my process is, I guess, now, which is, Sound Miner I've got, 14 terabytes of sounds on my little RAID drive. And
that's a couple. And
it's just one or two. Yeah. And I just go through all that, and I just try to find the right, and and if there's obviously tweaking. I love I used a lot of Altiverb for design, or whenever we'd go into headspaces, I'd use a lot of that. I'm trying to think of what are my shortcuts. for my show.
Well, that kind of stuff is good for people to hear, to really understand how it's so much ingredient based cooking, and it's less about how much money you're going to spend on plugins versus developing your aesthetic and choosing the right sound versus whatever, and having a high standard for whichever sound you cut in there. I think it's good for people to hear that coming from somebody like you that's been working on that type of show.
Yeah, it was funny. We had some help from. On Star Trek, Chris Garabosio, who's just this amazing sound editor for Skywalker, helped with some of the design on the first couple episodes on Star Trek. And when we got his stuff back, it was amazing to just see that, stuff wasn't heavily processed. It was just 2 or 3 of the right sounds. And that was it. He didn't have to cut it 100 tracks wide. It was just granted, he was like, "Oh yeah, here's a spaceship from Tron," and I'm like, "Okay, well, yeah, obviously that's helpful.
That's awesome. That's fun.
That's pretty cool. I don't quite have access to that, but it's a lot of fun. And I'm a big believer too. And if you have 4 or 5 things, bounce it down and just send the comp. Don't you don't need to have. That's actually one of my pet peeves is when I get stuff from other editors to incorporate into my track, and it's here's 20 things, and I don't know, 15 of them all sound basically the same. You don't just pick 1 or 2 of them, and that, or maybe you have one in the front and one in the surrounds if that's what you need, but have them be similar sounding. But I'm a big believer in the as obviously when I started out, I did a lot more of putting in a million little things, and there's a lot of sounds I have that are a whole lot of tiny pieces that I've comped, and then I just keep the big comp, and it's like I said earlier, you can take those big pieces and start using them, and you don't necessarily need the tiny pieces anymore.
Mm-hmm. So with the 8-day turnaround, you don't have a lot of time to be going out and recording custom sounds, right? You're cutting mostly from library?
Yeah, I would say 90% of that show comes from libraries. I was very fortunate to have access to the Warner Brothers library and the Sound Deluxe library when I first started, so I was able to build out a lot of. I'm not one of those hey, let's just download everything off the library. It's just whatever I've been cutting. I just keep my projects. But yeah, so that's been very helpful. But I would try to record a little something as much as I can. A lot of the. The zombie, all the zombie, in Walking Dead, there's always a zombie on a fence, shaking it and banging on it. So I went and recorded a bunch of that. I remember there was, I think it was the beginning of season 6, episode 1. They build this corrugated metal wall to get all the zombies to turn. And living in Venice, I found this great corrugated metal wall that they built right in the middle of Abercrombie, which is this big walk street, and there's a million cars on it. So I got up at 4 a.m. one morning, and I went out, just started banging on this wall and, recording it. I'm like, is cops coming? I don't know. Got away with it, So I definitely, there's definitely when I can, whenever I could, I love, I got my little recorder, and so one of the things I would do is between seasons is I would usually travel rather than. Because I knew with Walking Dead was great because I was okay, 4 months from now, I have a job. Okay, well, what should I do? So I would travel a lot and take a month or 2 months. And one time I even went all 4 months. I went to India for 4 months. And I would bring my recorder. So I would travel and make recordings. And a lot of those sounds would become signature sounds later in the show. All the zombie stabs is just me walking around in Nepal. I was hiking to... Annapurna base camp, and snow was melting, and there was just great mud that had this nice slap and then a crunch afterwards. So I just got out my little recorder and slap crunch, and that's basically. And then that became my contact instrument when I got back. And now it's just every single time there's a zombie stab, it's me walking around, crunch. So there is a lot of stuff that got recorded, but initially it was mostly library stuff, I would say.
Cool.
Anything that creaked or squeaked, on that show, I would just record and as I would experience different things.
How do you handle your template for when you bust open a new show? What does your template look like? New episode, I guess.
Well, okay. So our stage we mixed on literally had 48 inputs. So I had 48 mono tracks.
Nice.
And that's all I was allowed to deliver with. So that actually was, and this is where I really started learning how to comp. So I would always have, a series of work tracks that would have all my favorite plugins on, or processing chains or whatever they were, and they would always comp down. So what I would try to do, I would say, and I succeeded this maybe 10% of the time, would be to edit everything in my work tracks, comp it, and then slide it down into my delivery tracks. And it was basically that there was an old school, they were running on I think it was a DFC. So now they all have S6s. I leave the show, they all get S6s. And they got as many tracks as they want. So it was actually kind of freeing, because I didn't have to pre-pan anything, because all that was going to be lost once we brought it into the stage. So I was really kind of one of the last people to just work in a way where I was just literally finding the right sounds to deliver, and getting the basic volumes and balances. But at the end of the day, I didn't have to do a lot of the pre-panning or placing in space that I know a lot of editors have to run into now, which I'm doing a lot more of now that I'm on Star Trek. So yeah, so that was so my template was, I think in food groups, so a lot of people I work with have they would do like 18 monos, and what is that, 20 or whatever, however many stereos are left over. But I like to keep more, like, for me, my template 1 through 10 was miscellaneous, doors, all that kind of stuff. Then vehicles and gore was the 20s, and then the 30s was crashes, impacts, fights, that kind of stuff. 40s was explosions, design, bigger kind of thought stuff. And then 41 through 48 was all our zombies.
Nice.
So we kept it pretty lean, which was, I don't know, it really teaches you a lot to know that you can't just add another track and make it work, I feel. And it really forces you to make some decisions.
Yeah, that's great. And so, like, as you step into a big library, I mean, you said your library is 4 terabytes, and you're also stepping into, the Warner Brothers library, and, all these other big libraries that have been developed by dozens of people over years. What's your approach to familiarizing yourself with what's in there and what's good and what's not? Like, how do you even step into a big library that you're new to, I guess?
Well, my library is easy because, I'm really bad at keeping it organized. So when I see a lot of a sound, I know it's probably pretty good because I've used it a lot. I've changed, when I first started out, it was just find as many things that could work as I could and then import. And then that was kind of how I built my library. And then now it's more like, once you get to the point where you have basically it's just kind of confidence. You're like, oh, I know this is the sound that'll work. So I kind of just can quit. And now my process is more just, I kind of like going at it blind every time. I kind of like just coming up with words. So you start learning, I guess it's keywords. You kind of learn how people think. And a lot of these libraries, they've all kind of got the same sounds in them, as you go through them. It's not like, they've all got the sound ideas. They've all got so you start learning how to find your favorite sounds, for me, like I love the 5033 Suburban is like my go-to, like, whenever I need a big V8 truck sounding thing, I just type 5033 in any library and it'll show right up, you know what I mean? And you just start learning things like that, So
the question I have for Tonebenders, Tim, here is,
oh yeah,
what the Canadian
Toronto Tim.
Toronto Tim.
Pasquale.
Toronto Tim.
So as you're hearing all of this, like what's familiar, what's different, like as you contrast, what Warner Brothers Tim or LA Tim is doing here to your own workflow, your day to day, as you're working on one show for 5 years, what's familiar, what's different to you?
A lot of it is familiar, but I'm actually, one of the reasons I reached out for Tim is I'm in a rut and I'm trying to work my way out of it. And I thought that Tim might be able to give me some sweet inspiration, But Tim has an advantage. LA Tim has the advantage of there's 4 months off in between seasons. This show I'm working on, it's 26 episodes on a 2-week cycle. So it's 1 year. It works 52. So I've been working almost literally nonstop for for coming up on 5 years. Yeah, January will be 5 years on this show. There was one point where there was a 2-month break, but since other than that, it's been nonstop. And at times it is crushing in the when you wake up in the morning and you know, okay, I just finished this episode. Oh wait, it's the same goddamn dogs again. It's a show about little puppy dogs. So
my nieces watch it.
Yeah, it's called Paw Patrol. I think I've talked about it on this podcast before. So it's
I call it Papa Troll just to
Paw Patrol.
I don't see any trolls in this. It's just a bugger.
So some of the things he's talking about, like between seasons. The good thing about the show I'm working on is each season they, to sell more toys, introduce a bunch of new vehicles. So I have to then come up with a bunch of new vehicles sounds. And I'm running out of vehicle sounds. Actually, I had an interesting thing that's kind of cool. The mixer, this guy named Richard Spence Thomas, and we discovered the joy of distortion on vehicles recently because I've just been running out of good, as LA Tim was saying earlier about finding the right sound to begin with. I'm running out of right sounds for these giant, stupid vehicles that they keep throwing more at me. And so they have this boat now that, I'm trying to think if this episode's aired yet. I'm not giving away anything. Yeah, no one cares. No one that listens to this cares. There's a giant boat.
Spoilers.
Yeah, season 4 has a giant boat, and towards the end of season 4, you learn that the giant boat is amphibious vehicle, and it can go up on land, and these two like multi-story high sets of wheels come out of the bottom of it, and it drives up onto the beach and into the jungle. And this is like the 4th very large vehicle along these lines, and I'm running out of sounds to make these vehicles. So I cut something that half of me was hoping would work and the other half of me knew wasn't going to work. And, I'm just like, come on, bail me out of this, Richard, the mixer. And he pulled up the faders, got to that scene, and I work down the hall from him is where my edit suite is. And we have a chat program that we can talk back and forth. And I get my thing beeps and he's like, this is not working. So I come over and we're talking about it. And we just came up with the idea to put distortion on it and see how it would work. And it worked. It brought it to life. All of a sudden, this big vehicle that I'd used too many low sounds, it was bringing up harmonics with the distortion that were in higher pitch, and it made it work, and it made it kick ass. Like, it was super cool. And so now I'm doing that in my edit sessions, is starting to put some distortion into things to make them bigger. And like, it's not like we're not the first people to come up with the idea of putting distortion on stuff, but I follow very much the same workflow or way of thinking as LA Tim just said about how you want to find the right sound and put it in. And so I didn't do a lot of distortion to the big vehicles, but now I'm playing around with that a lot more. And that I found to be something really cool to work into, and just kind of something new to me. Not even new to me. I've put distortion on things before. It's not inventing the wheel, but in this context, I've really enjoyed playing around with that in the last couple of weeks. It's been fun. So that's something. But yeah, as I said, I'm not at the point. The other problem with this show, this Paw Patrol show that I'm working on, is I'm credited as the sound supervisor, but I'm doing all the sound effects for it. Someone else is doing ambiances, someone else is doing feet, and someone else is doing dialogue. But I'm cutting all the vehicles and all the vaudevillian kind of cartoon zings and all that stuff. And the way that a lot of these vehicles and they all transform and stuff like that, I'm the only one that has ever cut that. And there's no one that can cover for me. So I can't really go on vacation because that information kind of only exists in my brain and my templates. And that is also a pressure. Like, I can't get sick, and it's beating the hell out of me, to be honest with you. I'm hoping the producers of the show aren't listening to this.
So how does that get handled in LA? I mean, clearly sometimes, like you're doing right now, you step off the show, someone else has to step into your shoes. I'm talking to LA Tim now.
So I've actually just went through this. So I started up on Star Trek this summer and July, and I was just getting deeper and deeper into creating all the this, that, and the other, the beeps and making them all, and they were all in my head. And then at the end of August, my girlfriend was diagnosed with she already had been, but it came back. She has a tumor in her spinal cord, and an astrocytoma. Is very serious, and it had started growing again. So I spent all of September, she was in the hospital, and I would go to work, and then I would go to the hospital and spend the night with her, and then I go back to work, and then I would go in. And at the end of, and in the beginning of October, she ended up getting the surgery in Tampa, Florida, so she could fly out there, and needed to do, because there's only one surgeon in basically the world who can do this without paralyzing her, this operation. And so I came to a point where we had episodes 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 mixed every week. It was, it was a 4-day mix. We'd have 3 days off, and the next 4 days were on mixing. So there was literally no way I could do this. Like, it just became impossible. And I had to just give up control and hire guys and be like, I'm so buried between what I currently have to create and what I have to do. And so here's our mix sessions. Good luck.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it kind of started off that way because I was just originally planning on just killing myself to get the whole thing done. And you know what happened was they did their stuff, and I would get it, and I'd be like, whoa, that's not the right beat, but I don't have time to fix it. And I'd let it go to the stage, and you know what? Nobody noticed. Like, I'm hearing stuff in my head and like thinking, oh God, I hope this goes. And everything flew by just fine. You know what I mean? And I started to learn, like, okay. And this was a huge lesson for me, which is, like, it's okay. You gotta it's okay to stop and learn and like let someone else do something sometimes, because otherwise you can't, there's more important things in life in a way, like being there for your girlfriend when she's having spinal surgery, because, so, so it was definitely hard. Like, I know we're supposed to be talking about other stuff, but like, that was really hard. And it was a huge lesson of like, it's all in my head. Like, it won't sound right. It's not going to match. And then at the end of the day, it's sound, and it's okay. It's like, and just because it's not the way you do something, and maybe it's slightly off or slightly wrong, but you can always fix it. If they do something wrong, you can say, oh no, hey, look here, try this, do that. I mean, take some time to review it, but you find a way, like. So I would say for you, you should get some help and learn how to do that.
Well, I had to do that
No
when,
offense.
when my children were born, I had to do that. I had to figure out a way to get to people, because my wife, for some reason, wanted me to be part of their birth and be a part of their lives. So yeah, weird.
Absolutely.
So I had to take some time off for that. But you're right. I got to stop being so serious.
That's the real thing, though. It's like, even if it's not going to happen exactly the way that you would have done it, it'll still happen one way or the other. The show will still hit the air, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's just about coming to acceptance with that, I guess.
Yeah.
So how are you liking Star Trek beyond the medical issues with your family there?
Well, creatively, I couldn't be happier. I mean, it's so much. I mean, there's so much creation every week. I mean, everything is, I can't, I'm not one of those people that likes to recycle sounds. So like for me, I have to kind of create everything from scratch as best I can. Once I've established something, then I'm happy as I'll get out to repeat it. But, so it definitely, it was really a lot of growing pains to try to get that show up and running, but now it was fun. It's exactly what I asked for. And it's, when I'm leaving Walking Dead, I was like, well, I need some, I can't do any more gore. I would love to do like some crazy space show. And then this fell in my lap. And, it's one of those, be careful what you wish for, is because now it was nice. Something about being in the 7th season and being able to get your days in a normal kind of 10-hour day is really nice, compared to hitting the end of the day and then realizing that you just did not get nearly as much done as you wanted, because you still have more to create, and it's that kind of thing constantly. I wish I had way more time to do more and create more, and not having to just move on. But that's also healthy too, working in TV. You got to learn when to move on.
So you stepped into Star Trek from the very beginning on this one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I guess it's an established franchise, so there is certain aesthetic that's established, but then you're also creating a whole new palette from scratch. So how did you balance that? Like, what was the approach there?
Well, we got a lot of the original sounds, so I would use those as kind of reference. And our universe takes place in it's 10 years before the Enterprise, but I think it's the Enterprise from the new set of movies. So it's this whole new kind of universe. But Alex Kurtzman, the showrunner, he wants us to put in as many, he likes us to pay homage and do all that. So it was a lot of fun for me to take, to try to find a lot of what I would do is try to find an original sound for something and then tweak it or twist it to make it old but new, so that there was a lot of reference, and there's like tribbles in it, so I went and got the original tribbles and put them in, because there's the tribble, that's nice. What it should be. So that's a lot of fun. But then other things, like all the phasers and the ships, and that's all new, actually, all that kind of stuff.
Were you bestowed a classic Star Trek sound library when you started on it?
I was bestowed the CBS library, and then I'm actually good friends with another sound guy, a sound supervisor designer named Mark Mangini, who is
he was on the last episode of our podcast. So he's a great guy. He actually sent me a lot of. He worked on the original Star Trek movie and had a bunch of their raw stuff. So he sent me a bunch of that stuff, which was really fun to go through and hear. Here's the transporter, but now here's the all the other takes that didn't work leading up to it, which is wow. There's a lot of kind of feedback loops, so. And then I've actually been able to use some of that to put back in the series, which obviously no fan has ever heard before, but it's just fun for me to know that these original sounds are still existing in the show. Which is cool.
Yeah. So from a creative standpoint, it's definitely a cure for doing the same thing again and again and again.
Yeah, there's going to be at least 12 seasons of this one. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's definitely been, it's a totally different kind of challenge. There's no monotony, really. It's mostly terror and terror. Mostly it's terror, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you very much for being on the show today, Tim. I learned a lot, and I'm going to take a lot of stuff you said and try and integrate it into my own workflow. So thanks for sitting in with us today. We really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome.
Thanks to everyone who listens and participates in the show. Thanks to Tim Farrell for jumping on with us today. Thanks to Stacey Dupass for letting us bend and twist her voice on our bumpers. You can follow the show at the Tonebenders and go to tonebenderspodcast.com to leave a comment. You can support the podcast by shopping at tonebenderspodcast.com/Amazon or tonebenderspodcast.com/BH. That helps pay our hosting fees. Also, thanks to Owen Peters for helping edit this episode. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to Tonebenders. You can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. If you listen on iTunes or Stitcher, please write us a review while you're there. To support the show, go to tonebenderspodcast.com and click through our Amazon link or leave us a tip. You can also download and listen to our entire show archive there and leave a comment on our site or on SoundCloud. Keep up to date by following at the Tonebenders on Twitter or find Tonebenders Podcast on Facebook and YouTube. Email us with your questions and ideas at info@tonebenderspodcast.com.